All right, we should be recording. So welcome everyone to Who Am I? Today, I have Steve here with me from Fortra. I believe you're on the Cobalt Strike development team. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Awesome. And I've been following your work for a long time, and especially like I follow you on X and follow your GitHub and I've read your blog. So really happy to have you here. Happy to have you on. And excited to talk about how you ended up at this point, right? So being a developer engineer at Fortra for Cobalt Strike team, to me, is a big deal. Cobalt Strike is, and I think the most commercially successful, well-known C2 tool ever, I would say, right? And it's been that way for a while now. So to me, this is like, you've attained a high position in the community. To me, somebody who appreciates C2 development, enjoys it, appreciates malware and stuff like that. So I really appreciate you doing this. And I think it'll be really helpful for people who are interested in that sort of a path. So thank you, appreciate it. And I just want to ask about, I guess, kind of how you got there, right? I think a lot of people would be very interested in understanding your past, how you got into the industry, as well as how you ended up in this position. But my first thing is like, what came first? Did you get into offensive security or hacking and then decide to make it a career? Or is this something that came out of your academic study or came later?
Yeah. Well, first, thanks for having me. It's an absolute privilege to be here. Yeah. So for anyone who's listening who doesn't know who I am, I'm Steve. I'm a researcher on the Cobalt Strike team. I've been at Fortra now for almost 2 years. And yeah, I think it's a very privileged position. I feel like it's an absolute honor to be able to steward the offensive security community through my contributions to the product. And yeah, my background is a little bit varied. So then before we started recording, we talked about how I'm both a Navy and Marine veteran. And I'm going to dive right into the background of this, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious already if you went green to blue or blue to green.
Yeah, definitely. So I was 17. I grew up in South Texas. So when I say that, a lot of people imagine maybe San Antonio as being South Texas. But there's a whole other part of Texas further south called the Rio Grande Valley. And that's where I grew up in. And I was 17. And like every 17-year-old, I thought I had my life figured out. I thought I was the smartest human being on the planet.
Sure.
And so I was tired of my parents telling me what to do. So like just a fantastic idea. I thought I should enlist in the Navy because no one will tell me what to do if I enlist in the Navy. So I did that.
Okay.
My mom signed like the parental waiver. When I went to the recruiter's office, I did pretty good on the ASVAB and I got offered a nuke contract. Which came with like a $10,000 signing bonus. And I was 17 years old, never seen $10,000 in my life.
Sure, yeah.
And so I was like, yeah, dude, I'll do this. Like, it can't be that hard. Like, people probably do it all the time.
Yeah.
And so I learned a couple of things. One of them, the very first thing was people definitely tell you what to do when you enlist in the Navy. That is a requirement, actually. It's actually,
yeah, that definitely happens.
And the second thing was like nuke school is really hard. I think a little bit in retrospect, I think like to this day, I consider it like the most rigorous academic program I've ever been a part of by far. I've been to a lot of school. I've been to a ton of school since then. But like the most rigorous academic program I've ever been a part of is Naval Nuclear Power School in Charleston, South Carolina.
Is that 2 or 2.5 years?
So the pipeline, if I remember correctly, is set out to be 2 years.
Okay.
You do it depends, I guess, on your rate. So the electricians and the electronic technicians, the EMs and ETs, we have I think a 12-month A school in Charleston It's like in one half of the building, and then power school is on the other half. So you do 12 months of A school, you do 12 months of power school, and then you do, I think, like 6 months, or maybe I think it's 6 months, and then prototype is longer, something like that. I can't remember the time frames.
Sure.
But yeah, so I finished A school, I did power school, and like as probably like halfway through power school, I realized this is probably not this is probably not for me. And not that because I didn't think it was interesting. I actually think it was very interesting. I just like didn't see myself having a career in it when I was younger, like in high school, in middle school. I was really big into tinkering with computers. That's like a nascent interest for me. And there's not a lot of that when you're when you're enlisted in the Navy, trying to be an electrician.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things I credit that experience with is like very fundamental knowledge behind how like electronics work, like the electricity. And so I applied to go to the Naval Academy. Fortunately for me, the Naval Academy selection rate out of power school is actually very high. And so I was selected to go to the Naval Academy. I did a year in the prep school in Rhode Island. And then went to the Naval Academy in Annapolis, class of 2019.
Wow, man. Unbelievable. I had no idea you went to Annapolis. That's incredible. I mean, that's a big accomplishment. So interesting. I actually also was in the Navy, joined when I was 18, did well in my ASVAP, was offered nuke school, but turned it down because I didn't want to enlist for 6 years. I had told myself going in, I'm only enlisting for 4 years. And so I said, no, I don't want to do that. I only want a 4-year contract. And I ended up going weather meteorology route, AG. And then it turns out you also do oceanography. The A school was 9 months. And the reason I bring this up is to agree with you and kind of set the record straight a little bit here that it was the most rigorous educational experience I ever went through.
Yeah.
It was intense. And I don't think people, well, I know people who haven't been through it don't really understand that. And there's this idea that somehow military enlisted personnel are not highly intelligent or capable of this kind of education. And that school was intense, and I can only imagine what nuke school was like. So I just wanted to bring that up, agree with you that like that kind of education that the military is doing, they've figured out how to make it extremely effective and efficient. They're very good at it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I was very impressed with the education that I got there. So you go to Annapolis. What happens after that when you finish Annapolis?
Sure. So about halfway through my time at the academy, I kind of realized, so I was really successful. So everybody freshman year takes this like cyber operations like class. And that was like, everything just sort of clicked for me. I had like a really good intuition for how to build things and like understanding like computer fundamentals. So I decided to major in that. About halfway through my time at the Naval Academy, so going into junior year, I kind of like have this realization that all my friends at the academy are either prior enlisted Marines or people who wanted to be Marines. And so that like sparked an interest in me. It almost felt like I'd found my people.
Yeah.
And so I start doing like these Marine extracurriculars. I like fall in love with like the mentality of the Marine Corps. There's something about like the intensity that for me is just like absolutely fulfilling. It's very, it like fills me with satisfaction to be able to like work with people that are that driven to win. And so I go all in. So I'm going to join the Marine Corps. I'm going to do this. And then again, like you would think I would have learned my lesson like maybe the first time, but so I'm like getting ready to graduate. I'm like thinking about like what MOS I might want. So I think in the Navy it works a little bit different. I think if if I remember right, you contract for a specific MOS or a specific job, like a specific rate, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. And so,
Well, yeah. I mean, I did it as far as enlisted. I'm not sure
right.
officer, but
I think,
probably
yeah.
similar.
I think in the Marine Corps, you really only have like 2 selection criteria. I think now there's a third. I think they were adding it as I was leaving. But you can only you only commit yourself to ground or air, and then you get your specific platform or your specific MOS after TBS, so after 6 months of basic school in Quantico. So I kind of started thinking about it. I'm not really sure I want to do cyber in the Marine Corps. I think at this point I was all in on Marine Corps Kool-Aid. I was like, if I'm gonna be in the Marine Corps, I'm gonna do the Marine Corps thing. I need to suffer outside and like get rained on, which actually turned out to be like my favorite parts of the Marine Corps.
Oh yeah, sure.
So I graduate, I go to TBS, and I have like a very humbling experience with failure. So I get after TBS, I get selected to be an infantry officer in the Marine Corps. I go to infantry officers course and I don't make the cut. So kind of recycled into the selection process. And I fortunately get to become a combat engineer, which is also moderately rare. Usually you transition to something totally unrelated.
Sure.
And so a little bit of good fortune there. And then a little bit more good fortune, go to combat engineer school in North Carolina. And I get orders to 1st Combat Engineer Battalion in Camp Pendleton. This probably doesn't mean anything to anybody that's not a Marine, definitely maybe even in the Marine Corps. But first CB is like famously the Combat Engineer Battalion in the Marine Corps. Also, it's Camp Pendleton, California. So beautiful, absolutely beautiful weather. Just a great place to be. And I spent some time out there absolutely doing a totally different kind of breaching than what most people listening to this podcast are probably familiar with. So
sure.
We're blowing down doors, doing trainings, going out to 29 Palms. I get my fill of getting rained on and suffering. And yeah, that's most of my entire Marine Corps tour at 1st Combat Engineer Battalion. I'm absolutely privileged to have done that. The timing worked out semi-conveniently too. So when the time came to decide whether or not to stay in the Marine Corps, you get offered career designation. And my timing worked out that I declined, but there wasn't enough time left on my obligation to send me anywhere else. So like typically you decline and then you get orders somewhere else anyway.
Right.
But it worked out for me. Like I declined and like I wouldn't have had enough time to fulfill my obligation anywhere else. So I got to stay at CB. I got like a full, I think like 3.5-year tour at CEB, which is like, I got to see like three or four battalion XOs, like 3 battalion commanders. It was really interesting to be like in like a very junior, like in a more junior officer position and see so much turnover happening everywhere. So that's my time in the Marine Corps. Kind of starts wrapping up. I decide like this is probably not something I'm going to do for the long term. I've already done the coolest thing as a combat engineer officer. Like I've done there is nowhere else I can go. It's like a little known fact. Most combat engineers in the Marine Corps are not at combat engineer battalions. You're actually at logistics battalions, like facilitating logistics. And so I've done the coolest thing. Like there's nowhere else I can go that like would really like fulfill me in the same way. Also like my knees and like my ankles are like just absolutely destroyed at this point. And I decide it's probably time to start looking at like this cyber thing again, because it's interesting to me. I have a little bit of like formal education on it. And then I almost start to panic. Like I have like 24 months left in the Marine Corps, and I'm like, well, I don't have like a transferable skill. Like if I get out,
Right.
no one's gonna care. They're like, Steve is really good at running rocket ranges. Like Steve can run 208 Charlie like with his eyes closed. Like nobody cares.
Right.
And
I think a lot of veterans probably go through that when they
yeah.
decide to transition out. I know I thought about that. I'm like, what am I going to do? I'm not going to go work at a news station as a weatherman or something. Like, what am I going to do? And then I found out, oh, you can work at an airport. I'm like,
yeah,
okay. Like, I don't really want to do that forever.
Yeah.
So totally understand that. I'm sure a lot of people listening actually connect with that because there's a lot of veterans in the InfoSec community. A lot of the people who have been on the show actually were in the military as well. So it makes total sense. So you're kind of trying to figure out like, what am I going to do in the civilian world, right?
Yeah, the model, and I noticed it now on LinkedIn. I was kind of aware of it before, but now like a lot of my peers have also started to get out. And so the model that most Marine Corps officers seem to follow is you get out, you become like a project manager at some like defense contracting company, Lockheed, whatever.
Yeah, sure.
And that like you transition some of your leadership and project planning skills to the civilian sector in that way. That sounded super boring to me. I really did not want to do that. That became like my fallback plan. I was like, if all else fails, I will try to do that.
Right.
So I started panicking. I kind of started looking around, and I decided to start my master's in cybersecurity at Georgia Tech. This was kind of my bid for success. Like I need to like demonstrate that I still have some technical expertise in this thing that I haven't really touched while I've been, getting rained on. Funny story, like somehow, and I think most Marines will identify with this too. Like 29 Palms is in the desert of California, and it's supposed to get like an inch of rain a year. But somehow I swear every time I went out there, it rained like the whole time I was there. So, and I don't know how that's possible. I don't like, it's probably not true, but that's how I remember it.
Yeah. Interesting.
So I started my master's at Georgia Tech, and around the same time I started publishing kind of open source work, just random things that I'm putting together. I don't really have a sense of how it all comes together. I started doing like try hack me's and hack the boxes. Trying to like find my niche in the space. I recognized pretty quickly that I'm like at best like an average operator. I don't like, my intuition isn't there. But what I'm really, really good at is like being able to build tools and being able to like understand how these systems come together to like enable a capability. And so I go all in on that, and I start building stuff. My most probably like recognizable project at the time was this third-party agent for Havoc, which was Spider's C2 framework, which you're probably familiar with. And so I started building this third-party agent. I started getting some feedback. It was an interesting time. This was like pre-ChatGPT. So like, I look back at that code now and I'm like, this is horrendous. Like, this is so bad.
I'm so glad you said that. Oh my gosh. I'm so glad because, man, so yeah, I built some tools that were pre-AI, right? I think about them now that way. Of course, I didn't think about it then. But I built this C2. I always wanted to build a C2. And that was like just this big goal of mine. I just think they're so cool, right? And I love how much there is involved and how you have to get all these different components working together. And I really enjoyed the process, but it was a grind. I mean, it was a grind. I spent a long time on it. I got to release it at DEF CON. I was like, but then I was just thinking about this literally this morning. I thought, boy, if I go back and look at that code now, I already know what it looks like because it's burned into my brain from working on it so much over that time period. But I thought if I go back and look at that, it is going to be so horrible.
Yeah.
Because it's pre-AI. And I know people say, oh, AI writes shit code or whatever. Well, you can go look at my code pre-AI.
Yeah.
Okay. It's functional.
Yeah.
It works. I'm very
It
proud
compiles.
of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like it works. I used it for a long time on real ops and, got around EDR and stuff. Like I'm proud of that. But you look at that code, man, it's a mess. It's a hot mess. It works. It's a hot mess. So I'm just really glad to hear you say that. That's hilarious because I never would have expected that from you. I just think, I had this idea that like, oh, he's so good at writing these tools and everything. Does he even use AI now? Like, I don't know. He's like the best. So I'm just like super relieved to hear you say that because I was literally thinking about that this morning. I'm like, man, my pre-AI stuff.
No, I think it's only
That's
natural
awesome.
now. I think even like before I really got into a lot of the AI development tools, and we talk about this on the team sometimes, like you work on a feature, and then like some time later, you'll have to go back and look at it again. Somebody asks you a question or something, and you're like, wow, what idiot wrote this? And you pull up Git blame and like, oh, that's me. That's literally me.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's just, I think it comes from a place of like, if you're in a constant state of self-improvement, if you like genuinely believe you want to like learn and improve yourself, then like you are perpetually stuck in that problem. You like, because the you today by definition has to be worse than the you tomorrow. If you like, that cascades into a year from now.
So, right?
Yeah,
that's the idea. Yeah. You want to be able to look back and be like, man, I was, not as good as I am now, or not this or not that. And if you're looking backwards and saying, the opposite, and if you find yourself like longing for the time or who you were back then you're probably going the wrong direction, right?
Yeah.
So
especially I think about projects I did in undergrad where I didn't have like a really good grasp of pointers, like how the heap worked, and so I would just write my entire program in the main function. I was like, the whole thing is happening.
Oh yeah. Me too. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's just, I think so. I can't imagine doing that now.
Oh yeah, but I totally did that early on. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, why are these people separating all this stuff? It's hard to, I just put it all in main.
Yeah.
I was like angry about it when I would look at other people's stuff, and then eventually I got it. But I'm interested why offense? Like I understand kind of, the transition from the military, you go to get a master's in cyber, you kind of have this intuition for computers, but in particular, like why offense? Was there something that caught your interest? Because like, I don't know, a lot of people don't go that route, right? Like we're a minority in the space in terms of the just sheer numbers, I think. So I guess kind of what sent you down the path of building offensive tooling or looking at things through that lens?
Something about, I want to say something really cool, like some real like Marine thing, and be like, yeah, the adversarial mindset or something. But I think it's just a very interesting problem set, I think, to operate in the offensive space as a contributor to security rather than like as a threat actor, right? Because you not only have to build tooling, but you build it, like the end goal in mind is not like I want to have the slickest operation. Like that's important, but the end goal, the ultimate end goal is the security ecosystem is better, right? And I think in offensive security, a lot of times we lose sight of that a little bit. It all becomes about like, I want to evade EDR every time because like that's the most important goal for me forever. Yeah,
I want to pwn. Yeah, I want to be elite.
Exactly.
I want to pwn. I want to take over stuff, and I want to get away with it, and you can't stop me. Yeah. That certainly, and I'm guilty of that in the past. I mean, I remember
I'm guilty of it too. So.
Yeah, I remember having conversations, and I remember somebody asking me because I was like, I think honestly, I was complaining that we were being told to like share our TTPs with this. Mm-hmm. With this party that was, they're going to make detections. And I'm like, to me, I'm like, dude, we spent months putting this together and we haven't even really used it yet. And you want to burn it? you know? And I was like upset about this at the time.
Yeah.
And I remember him asking me like, well, what is the goal? And I said, to pwn. Like
Yeah.
that was, you know, and this is earlier in my career, but I was like, yeah, man, that's what I'm a red teamer. That's what I care about. I'm a hacker. That's what I care about. It's not my job to do the blue team's job too. And that was, and I don't think about it like that now, but at the time I certainly did. I was like, why should I, you know, give this to them? And I've put all this work in, you know, they should figure it out themselves. Like, that was kind of my attitude at that time. And so, yeah, it's easy to fall into that in the offensive side, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And so to me, it's a very interesting problem. I think all the constraints, and it's something about it is like very intriguing to me. Like I find it like a very, very interesting. I think if you work on an EDR solution, the problem set is like pretty straightforward. You're kind of collect as much telemetry, and then you're trying to find some subset of that and I correctly identify it or attribute it as being malicious. But there's a lot more nuance to the offensive space. I think right now there's an ongoing Twitter argument with MSRC kind of related to this nuance, which maybe we can talk about. But I think the kinds of people that are attracted to that, there's almost a similarity with the mentality of being a Marine. Like you're in the Marine Corps, right? Like we have this culture of violence, for lack of a better word, and a culture of aggression, but it's constrained, right? It's constrained within ROE, it's constrained within policy, it's constrained within commander's intent. And similarly, like in the OffSec space, we have this, like, you know, I follow people on Twitter who are way better than me in this space, who can like single-handedly drop 0 days, bypass sandboxing, and like have a C2 session. That's super awesome. But like the power to the ecosystem, the value to the ecosystem is that they don't do that, right? The fact that they do it in this constrained way, that they do it in these engagements where the goal is to improve the security of their customer, or, you know, the whatever their relationship happens to be. And so in some ways, like that similarity was very attractive to me, and it's kind of what was continued to drive me forward, I think.
You know, I've never connected those two, but I asked this question to some of the guests on the podcast actually before, because again, I many of them I didn't even know they had a military history or a military background, and then I find out through, you know, interviewing them, and I started to realize just like how many of the people I wanted to have on and who are, you know, good in offensive security have this military background. And I asked, like, why is that? What is that? You know? And that's super interesting what you just said about it. It makes total sense to me because, yeah, in the Marines, you develop a ability that, you know, like you said, is ultimately violence, controlled violence that you can direct, and you hope that it's used for good, ultimately for good, to make things better for your society, for the people you're serving and protecting and everything. That's the idea, right? You have this capability that you've honed, and you can use it in a direct way to make things better overall. And it does really align with the offensive space, as you said. And because I think about it that way a lot, where it's like, I have this capability. It could be used for ransomware, hacking a bank, like taking down services, right? There's all these potentially, I don't know if you want to use terms like bad isn't a great term, illegal, whatever, but these destructive, perhaps potentially destructive use cases, right? And some of them, I guess, would be tied to like self-enrichment as well, right? Like you're going to use this thing to enrich yourself instead of community, right? But then you don't. And I think is it Spider-Man that the idea of with great strength comes great responsibility? That's at least where I know it
great
from.
Power,
I'm sure.
Yeah, with great power.
Yeah. So that's, I always think of that, right? I always think of that quote. I always think about that with people who work in offensive security, people who I know have the capability to do something. and instead they're like, when they share out some tool, they're like, oh yeah, here's a detection for it as well, and stuff like that. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense, that those two do seem very aligned. But I hadn't thought about it that way. So that's a great insight.
Yeah, and something about just like the average person in OffSec is very similar, I think, in mentality. And I find like that keeps me engaged in the community. It's in that similarity is very engaging for me. And so that's kind of what started my interest in like developing these offensive security tools. I met like some great people just right off the bat. Met Spider. I interacted with a couple of your guests. I think Justin LZ has been on, and so I interacted with him on Twitter a bunch. But it was not all positive. I think both for reasons that were probably my fault, but also just I think sometimes the community gets a little bit ego driven, and that's maybe one of the negative aspects. And so when I started doing all these contributions and I kind of started to experience some of like the negative sides, it was interesting to me, because to this day I still feel like I'm just some rando who like happened to like end up in offensive security. But especially back then, at the time when I was first kind of exploring, it felt like CTOs and CEOs were like coming out of the woodwork to like criticize something I was working on. And I was like, whoa, dude, like first off, like, I don't know you. So, and I'm just, but it was a learning experience, I think. And I think building in public in a lot of ways has kind of shaped my perspective into like who I want to be in the public space. So I'm always trying to be like, I do my best to be like a good human being to people. If people ask me questions, even the question's a little bit silly, I do my best to frame it in a way and answer it in a way that's helpful. Because I think that a lot of that was missing when I was trying to learn. A lot of it was like, maybe there was a blog post or you could read some source code and that stuff's useful. But like the number of times I ask somebody a question, they're like, that's so dumb, or like, you know, I'm just like, thanks, dude, you're so smart, dude, thanks. Like, well, I'm sure you've experienced that too.
Yeah. So a couple things you said here that I think are really good for people to hear that are coming up in the industry, especially, is like, first of all, that what you described is kind of imposter syndrome, maybe, that this idea that like, you know, you're just some person who stumbled into this, and maybe you don't feel like you belong, and maybe you're looking at what other people are doing. You're like, man, this guy over here, look at what he's doing. You know, what am I, right? Does my work have that kind of value? And to hear you say that, and I see this all the time. It's like some of the people that are the best in this space that I know that I've encountered have experienced imposter syndrome, or still do. Yeah. And it always blows my mind. I'm like, dude, what? You're like the man. Why would you feel this way, right? But I think it's important to recognize that a lot of us feel this way, and that it doesn't, right? So my point, I guess, is if you're feeling that way as you're coming up in the industry, titans of this industry, legends to me, have expressed feeling that way. So don't worry about it. And then the other thing you said about ego is, I think, has always been a part of hacking and OffSec as long as I've been around it. And it's changed in some ways from the IRC and flame war days and stuff like that, but it's still, it's very similar. And I think it's very easy for, and again, there's probably we could probably break it down into some psychological thing that like people who get into this space have some sort of condition where they're easily fall into this pitfall around ego. But it's just very common in the space that people either, you know, have an ego or want to protect their ego, and can be very defensive or very dismissive of other people, right? And I try to do the same thing. I try to not be dismissive when people ask me stuff, even if it does seem like, dude, how do you not know this?
Yeah.
I try not to do that, and I try to encourage people. And for the most part, I feel like most of the community these days does a pretty decent job. But yeah, it's, you see it happens, right? So that's another thing too, is like, I just, again, if you're coming up in the space and you're trying to get into the space and you run into people that are dismissive, or like, don't let it affect you, like you said, just be like, okay, man, cool, whatever, move on. Like, cause it's probably bound to happen,
Yeah, definitely.
So that's really good insight as well. Appreciate that.
Of course. And I think it's interesting because the community has changed even in my short time. I still feel like I'm a newcomer to the offensive security community. I did a lot of tinkering growing up. I know what an IRC is. I remember like getting on IRC, never did anything worthwhile or meaningful there. But I think the community has a lot of, or I guess is like in the middle of this like transformation, development kind of thing. Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think both on a technical level and like on a personal, like person to person sort of interaction level. It'll be interesting to see kind of how it all goes. But so I'm finishing up, bringing it back to my story now. So I'm finishing up my time in the Marine Corps. I'm starting to do all this open source development. I'm very fortunate. So very moderately recently, the DoD started the Skill Bridge program. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but
I'm not. I'm familiar with probably similar programs, but go ahead.
Yeah. So the way it worked out for me was in my last 6 months of the Marine Corps, I had the opportunity to do my day-to-day job as an intern at some private company. For me, it was Datalytica, which is this very small subcontractor out here in DC, where I actually did my first exploration into machine learning. So they were working on like really interesting adversarial machine learning concepts. And I kind of just jumped in head first. I hadn't really done a lot of machine learning. I'd done a little bit in undergrad. I did a little bit for my master's, which I was still kind of in the middle of. But I jumped right in, had a ton of opportunity to grow and self-learn. And there was an opportunity to come on full time after my skill bridge. And I took it. So I jumped on board. I'd done like the majority of the development on the product that they were on the research project, that they were working on for the Air Force Research Lab. And like very shortly into my time there, I like a friend of a friend, somebody I met on Discord, kind of gave me the hint that the Cobalt Strike team was looking for someone. And I jumped on that. I kind of put in an application. My technical with Will, who's now my boss, probably my worst technical I've ever performed on. Like somehow,
wow,
like, just terrible. I've done other technicals where like I've had a really good time.
Yeah.
And like you can really tell that I know what I'm talking about. Totally fumbled the technical with Will. Somehow still kind of got on for the next round of interviews, and everything kind of smoothed out from there. But yeah, it was just very interesting. Like I think I always wanted to end up somewhere like Cobalt Strike. But I don't know if I ever had in mind like a clear path to get here, or a clear path to end up in offensive security at all. I kind of just wished for it, and I did my best to work really hard at it. I tried to be a good human being, and somehow that seems to have mostly worked out. And yeah, so that's my story for how I got here.
Very interesting. Yeah, very cool. It's always awesome to get these stories, and they're generally unexpected. And the pathways are always really interesting, and they have so much variance. So that's really cool. So you get to this point, you're working on Cobalt Strike, and I got to say, the hires I've seen out of Fortra the last few years have been amazing. They're like collecting these people that I really look up to in the space. It seems like they're just putting together an amazing team over there. So you start working on Cobalt Strike and development for that. And once you're working on this full time, and now you've made it into, you're in offensive security, this is your task ahead of you. What is kind of your process in terms of new research? So I'm super interested in malware, in C2s, EDR bypass, all this stuff, but it took me a long time to figure out how to do it. Right. And I mean, it took me a really long time. It was baby steps, and it took me a long time to understand like what mattered within that research. So kind of, how do you, because there's so much to look at, I guess. What's your filter, what to get down to what's important and what you're going to focus on within that space?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things. So in my last job at Datalytica, that intro to machine learning for me really almost developed the niche in offensive security. There's not a lot of people in offensive security that do machine learning or have that kind of insight. There's a little bit more now with LLMs. I consider that to be almost a distinct vein, separate from the more classical machine learning that I prefer to work on. And so that intersects with the EDR space, because EDRs deploy, basically all security solutions now deploy some type of endpoint machine learning algorithm. And so that made me very uniquely equipped to be like the person who can research those types of things. Totally by accident. Again, like I didn't plan to do this. There was no pipeline at the Naval Academy that was like, you can become a malware developer who does anti-machine learning analysis. Like that doesn't exist. But I kind of ended up here, and that for me is one of the threads that I like to pull every time I get the chance. It's something that I think, if you believe all the marketing claims for any security product, probably any product in this day and age, AI is front and center of the product. Everybody's doing large language models in some capacity, but at the concrete technical level, a lot of what you'll find is Yara signatures are still the primary mechanic behind detections. ETW still like one of the primary telemetry sources. And so when you kind of start peeling back these layers, you kind of begin to see the paths in between the layers. And that for me is like such an interesting puzzle about how you can then thread the needle to achieve something you want to achieve. Something I worked on last year on the team was like the introduction of several new injection techniques that work from the UI. I built that kind of end to end, including like the Java side, which was its own emotional journey. But a lot of that is interesting, because working on CS, it's not only about developing the injection, it's about we pride ourselves in being like the most stable C2 possible. And that standard is very, very high. In our code review process, our testing, all of this is designed with that standard in mind. And so a little bit of a self pitch, but at Black Hat last year, I did a on the sponsored track. I did a talk on how we take a proof of concept injection to a production ready injection. Similar to how exploit devs take a proof of concept exploit and turn it into something for production. But for us, it's something that's very deliberate. I think you can't take any GitHub repo and just like pull it into CS and then like ship it to thousands of customers. You immediately get somebody who submits a support ticket, rightfully so. And so the mentality for me is kind of twofold, right? So I like to start with where is in the machine learning detection, where do we start there? How does that gather its inputs? How do we get the features that go into this model? And then what threads can I pull to almost like reverse engineer what I need to do to overcome all of those challenges?
Right. Interesting. Yeah, I saw on your blog, which I'll link below wherever I share. This will be in description, or I'll put it in a post. But I saw on your blog, one of the first things that caught my eye was a post about machine learning. And I don't see that very often when I'm looking at blogs within offensive security space. Yeah. So I thought that was very interesting, and I meant to ask you about that anyway. So that's really cool that you brought that up, and it makes sense once you break it down. I'm like, well, yeah, makes sense. So I guess I need to go out and start reading your blogs on machine learning and improve my knowledge.
It's an interesting field. I think, in almost like a disappointing way, the advent of LLMs has kind of resulted in like the more classical algorithms almost being ignored. I would argue that in the offensive security space, outside of VR and exploit dev, where I think there's a lot of use cases for LLMs, on the endpoint, what you're most likely to run into is probably some variant of a decision tree. And that decision tree is what is generating the quote unquote machine learning detections that you're probably running into. And so that makes that understanding like really important, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was another guest on here, Nicole Kerrigan, from Darktrace, who talked about this as well, that the rise of LLMs had kind of taken away from machine learning some of the focus, right? And kind of clouded things a bit, because people say AI, but they mean LLMs, and they're not even considering machine learning. And I think they use a lot of machine learning in their research as well, and think a lot of it. So she spoke about that a little bit as well. But that makes sense. It's very interesting. I think it's good to point out to people that because of everybody's focus is on LLMs right now, and a lot of people in the offensive space are focused on how to leverage LLMs, and rightfully so. I'm focused on that quite a bit myself, but I think it's important to point out that learning machine learning is valuable in the ways you've described, and shouldn't be kind of ignored now that we have large language models, right? So I think that's really good information for people to get. And if do you have any recommendations for people that are in the space that haven't looked at machine learning? Like, where do you start?
Yeah, there's a really good book that I recommend every time, or I try to recommend every time somebody asks. And the title is self-explanatory. It's the 100-page machine learning book.
Okay.
It's by his last name is Burkov. He's also on Twitter. And a lot of what that'll cover is it's a very succinct explanation of how classical machine learning algorithms work. And that wasn't the first book that I read. I'd read a bunch of other stuff, but I found that to be the most successful at really consolidating everything that I thought I would need to know. I still reference it sometimes just to like refresh myself on what's going on. Yeah, so hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's awesome. I think that's super helpful. I'll pick it up. I was writing it down as you said it. So yeah, that's great. I think that's great. I think a lot of people will check it out based on the value you've talked about in learning machine learning. So no, that's awesome.
There's another point here too, which is that I think companies like Dreadnought are doing research into what happens if you get LLMs on the endpoint, if you can see too less malware, I think is the narrative. And I think there's some interesting consequences maybe of that. But I think before you get to that point, you'll see machine learning on the endpoint, both from like an offensive perspective. Something that I've found in my research is that all versions of Windows 11 now ship with some machine learning library out of the box. It's the ONNX runtime. It's in System 32. You can find it with everything else. And Microsoft exposes it via this COM interface. In C++, you can get there with like the WinRT APIs. And so the intended use case for that is, machine learning in apps or, Windows applications from the Microsoft Store. And that's, what it is. But on the offensive side, I think there's an opportunity to kind of explore and maybe chain this with like remote LLMs in a way that's more useful than we can probably get to right now by trying to get LLMs on the endpoint. I've explored that. I have a couple POCs that are unreleased, trying to how
me
can
too.
I compress this LLM? Yeah, I'm sure you do.
Me too. I have an early one that it basically, the idea was that you could use human language instead of, I'm going to run this BOF or whatever.
Yeah.
You use human language. Hey, I want to do this on the network, and then it would generate. I think mine used either Python or, oh gosh, it wasn't Ruby. Lua.
Yeah.
So it would either generate Python or Lua script, and I had an engine that would execute it on the endpoint. And I tuned it to a point where it was fairly accurate. You got to put a lot of guardrails on there to make it more deterministic, to make it reliable, which was most of the problem early on when I was working on it. But at some point, I just felt like, well, I actually want to be surgical and deterministic. I don't really want my implant to do things I'm not expecting.
Right.
Because there's things I want to make sure I don't do, and I don't want it to suddenly do one of those things. So I kind of let it sit, right? But I'm interested, a couple things about what you said. The idea of getting an LLM on the endpoint, at this point, I'm thinking about living off the LLM that's already there, sort of like living off the land, right?
Yeah, that's a great thought.
It's like if there's so many cases where there's already going to be something there, right? Companies, especially, they have their developers all using LLMs now. Well, I'm not going to bring my own. I'm just going to use the one the developer already has on their machine. And in that way too, I'm not creating new traffic to be identified and identify there's something going on this machine. I'm blending in because I'm using, it's the traffic you're normally going to see from that developer in a sense. They're going to be, if they use Claude Code and I use their Claude Code, there's kind of no different traffic to see there. As opposed to if they're using Claude Code and I bring some implant that's making calls to an LLM, either self-hosted by me remotely, or it's making calls to OpenAI API. I think a lot of organizations are attempting to block that activity already because they don't want their own employees using unapproved solutions,
right? Or
using solutions that they don't have these business agreements around the data privacy with, right? So there's a desire from the business to make sure that their data is not going out the door to these other LLM providers or to these models that are unapproved. And so they're already taking steps to mitigate that. And I'm going to end up getting flagged for that if I'm bringing my own LLM in some way, right? So I've been thinking more about living off the LLM that's already there. And I think that'll be viable. But I hadn't thought about tying it to machine learning, and I hadn't really thought about, I knew that Windows was exposing some machine learning, but I hadn't looked into it too much. So I think that's really interesting. That'll be fun for me to dig into as a research project. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Something really you said, I think, something you said about the living off the LLM that's already there. I think there's a interesting overlap with, as Microsoft tries to figure out what the right role for Copilot is on the endpoint, there's an aperture there to do what you described through the built-in LLM access that would be on that machine, likely already. So that's interesting. Yeah, I'm curious to see where that'll go. I think there's been a lot of pushback on Copilot and the integration into Windows 11 specifically.
It's coming though. You know they're gonna shove LLMs into Windows, into various operating systems. I think it's become obvious that they're not interested in consumer feedback on that. Up to a point, right? If there's enough blowback, like with recall, I think a year ago they were saying we're going to push recall out everywhere, and I haven't even looked at the status. I don't even know if it's like totally pushed out now, and they just don't talk about it because of the blowback. But there was a lot of blowback, right? People are like, "What? It's saving all these screenshots, it's sticking them in this database that can be exfiltrated easily, and all this stuff." So there is blowback, but it's coming, right? And then the other thing about it is when enterprises bring in an LLM solution and they want their employees to use it, another thing that I really like about it from an offensive security standpoint is that often they're integrating it to where the LLM purposefully has access to things that user has access to, but maybe difficult for me as somebody who's landed on the box to get to. Even though I've landed on a box as a user and this user has access to these other things, they might be behind some additional controls, or I might be concerned about touching them. But going through the LLM, if the LLM likely is given access to those same things as that user, in even worse cases, access to things beyond what that user has access to, more broad company data or services or whatever. But even in the best case scenario, it's going to have access to things that user has access to, and gives you a new channel to grab that data or to search that data very easily, to parse that data very easily without raising any alarms. Because why would it raise an alarm that this user's LLM is retrieving or parsing data that this user has access to? Sounds fine. So I've been thinking about that a lot lately as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm very curious to see how the security landscape is going to evolve to solve that problem. It's interesting. I think in my mind, the answers haven't really changed. Like you just think the fundamentals are still the fundamentals, and they're still worth implementing every single time. But I think when you see something like the Mythos announcement and the conversation becomes like, are we ready for a post-Mythos world? What I'm thinking is like, I don't even know what that is. Like, have you figured out patching? Like, what are you talking about? Like,
no, exactly. Because to me, it's like, to be ready for Mythos, right? And it's coming out in a few weeks, for everybody. And I would argue it's already here. That's a separate kind of side tangent. But I've been arguing that it's already here. But even so, I think, the answer seems to be do more and do better at the things you already should be doing, right? And my example is like, okay, Mythos comes out and it finds a 0 day in some public-facing application that my organization has, okay? some RCE, unauthenticated RCE, let's say, and the box gets popped through this app that it's serving, right? Okay, well, we should already have controls in place to contain that, to detect it, to isolate it, and to evict. We should already have all that. Like, regardless of how the vulnerability was identified by Mythos, the end result is even if that app gets popped, well, they shouldn't be able to get anywhere else from there. They should be contained. And right, ideal world, sure, I know, like that's not the case in a lot of cases, but like that's what you should be working towards anyway.
Yeah.
Right. You should be saying to yourself, even when this app gets popped, they're going to be stuck. They're not going to be able to move laterally. They're not going to be able to escalate privileges. We're going to find them hopefully quickly, and we're going to contain the blast radius, and we're going to evict them. Right. And you should already be striving to do those things. So what really has changed? And I think the only thing I really take away as a change is like your time to remediate, your time to patch, your time to detection, your time to contain and evict. Those things maybe need to shrink. Right. Maybe your SLAs are kind of no longer valid. Maybe you need to find ways to condense your SLAs and move faster on things. But in terms of the controls and all that, I'm like, it's mostly the same, right?
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, am I missing something? I don't know. It's like there's all this panic, but I'm like, I think it's mostly the same, right?
Yeah. And to me, the narrative doesn't hold. I mean, I think I share your opinion, I think, which is that the quote unquote post Mythos world effectively already exists. You were already there. But I worry that in some sense there's almost like an excuse from some security providers to leverage the narrative to you need this new security thing, or there's always that new and shiny that I think is very attractive. And I'll draw another analog to the Marine Corps here, which is that similarly, right, human beings are similar in kind of any sort of place. And there's also an attraction to like new and shiny things. When I was at first CB, there was this big push to get everybody spun up on drone training. And at the time, the drones we used, they came in this big Pelican case, like probably like 6 by 6 by 3 foot deep. And combat engineers typically are foot mobile. And so when you're not going to carry that thing like any sort of significant distance. And so our method of employment didn't match our method of execution. But that was a narrative nobody wanted to hear, right? The important narrative was like, we're getting spun up on drones. Like they're using drones in Ukraine. Everybody needs to use drones. Even though like someone in the Marine Corps will use drones, probably not First Combat Engineer Battalion, right? And that's okay. And we can acknowledge that. But similarly, I think in the security space, there's been this huge push, I think, for LLM, both in like offense and defense, and like what all that means. And I'm not convinced, I don't think, by any of it. I think for the most part, things are the same. I think if anything, they're maybe faster. And solutions around that will be interesting, I think. I don't know if I have them. I'm one person, but it's interesting to think about, because what do you do when any sort of vulnerability can be like immediately weaponized? I think I'll bring it back to the MSRC discussion on Twitter now, which is like you have these vulnerabilities that got reported to Microsoft. Maybe they don't get patched. Now somebody becomes aware of them and weaponizes them. And what are the consequences for all those customers? I don't think we really know. I think we're still figuring that out. And so that's interesting.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that back up because I did want to talk about that the ongoing sort of drama. It was huge yesterday. I thought that today it would be died down. It's not.
It's not.
It's not. And yeah, I mean, so let me just cover this a little bit real quick for people that maybe are not as aware. So I kind of stumbled across this before it blew up, and I don't remember even what I just sometimes I'm just like crawling GitHub and like
Mhm.
looking at weird stuff, and I know I love finding something that like is really interesting and it has like no stars yet, and
Yeah.
it's just like I'm like, oh, here we go, So I stumbled on this inadvertently, like without really looking for it. I stumbled onto the user who was posting this stuff, and the repos had like no visibility yet. They had like no stars. I don't think many people were paying attention. And I start looking at this, and at first I'm like, what is this? Because there's a lot of stuff that's like crap that I come
Yeah.
across too, right? But I start reviewing the code and looking at what he's saying and looking at this. And I'm like, there's some really good stuff here. Dang, And I'm like, are there CVEs for this? What's going on? Because again, if somebody comes out claiming to have all these local privilege escalations and disable defender and all this stuff, and a lot of times it's crap or it's recycled stuff or whatever.
Right.
And they're just trying to get some reputation of, I don't know, get a job or whatever. So at first I'm very skeptical. And I start reviewing it, and I'm like, wow, there's really good stuff here. And I immediately like start looking at, okay, I don't really like how this is written or how it's been weaponized or whatever. I'm going to tweak this and I start working on my own versions. And one of the things I did was, I have built like a maldev harness for using with large language models. And I thought this would be a really good challenge for this harness that I had just completed and had been tweaking a little bit to see if it could take one of these examples that was also sort of, I mean, not incomplete, but again, I didn't, it wasn't complete in the way I want to deploy it.
Right.
And so I thought this would be a good challenge.
Some of them were in .NET, right? I think I saw that.
Yeah. The one I think was in .NET, and I'm like, I don't want to deal with this. I don't like this. So I gave it, the challenge of like, hey, let's port this to native C. Let's also implement some of the techniques that I prefer. And let's rebuild this thing kind of from the ground up. And I immediately started running into issues and some things that I had to solve for. And it ended up being like a variation, I'd say, a variant of the original research, but it worked out. And in like 2 hours, I was done. And I had this like fully weaponized version, native C, uses my my preferred like evasion techniques, and I'm testing it against EDR. I'm testing it on latest like fully patched Windows, and it's working great. And I'm like, wow, this is crazy. So I wait like a few days, and I'm like, at first I'm like, I didn't know if I was going to share this. And then I go, maybe I'll share this. So I start polishing it up, getting it ready to go put on GitHub, make a post about it or whatever. And I always want to reference the original research in the README for something like this. So I'm like, I better go get the link to his stuff so I can make sure I reference it. And I go to get the link, and it 404s.
Yeah.
And I go to his account page at 404s. And I'm like, okay, what's going on here? So I start looking for the name of the account. It was Nightmare-eclipse. And I find a blog where this person has talked about their negative experience, as they say, with MSRC and why they're putting this stuff out in the way they are. And it's, very angry. This person is upset. And if you go check out the blog, which I'll also link for people that are interested in learning more about this situation, this person's upset. And they're releasing this stuff 0 days publicly because of various reasons, but one of them being they're pretty pissed off about Microsoft, right? And so, I share this with some people and myself. Hey, here's this stuff, and this person's been banned, and I think they got banned from GitHub because of like their rhetoric, basically the way they were talking about this stuff, the way that they are saying they're going to harm Microsoft through these releases, right? And then shortly after, their GitLab gets banned. I think it only stayed up over the long weekend because it was like a holiday weekend. That's my,
yeah.
And so the GitLab gets banned, and I'm posting about it. A couple other people start posting about it on X, on Twitter, and then it just blows up as a story, right? And you have all these people coming out saying how terrible their experiences have been with MSRC. And I just want to say too, like, it is completely possible. I don't know what this person got their MSRC account banned for, because apparently that got banned before GitHub and all this other stuff. I don't know why. I've worked on a bug bounty team. I worked on a bug bounty team for AWS, and I understand being on the other side and some of the difficulty in dealing with researchers. So I don't know what they got banned about. Maybe they breached some of the rules of the program. I have no idea. So I just want to put that out there, because like nobody has even considered that maybe this person did something they shouldn't have done to get in trouble with MSRC in the first place. I'm just saying it's possible. I know, hopefully people don't become mad at me. I'm not defending MSRC. I'm not. Okay. But I'm just saying
I'm tweeting about it right now. Don't worry.
We don't have the full story. All I'm saying, I don't know what happened in the beginning to launch this whole thing, right? But something happened that they got kicked off MSRC. They start dropping these 0 days. They get banned from GitHub, and people get upset, and maybe rightfully so. I don't have the whole story. I don't like the idea of people getting their GitHub or GitLab accounts banned for dropping proof of concept code. I tend to feel like that does not limit harm. I may not be right. I don't know. It's kind of a big data problem to solve, I think, if you really wanted to examine what limits harm the best. And this has been a debate going on for decades, right? So I don't know the exact answer, but my intuition is like, you're not going to limit harm because the people who are going to abuse this, they already have it at this point. It's already been posted.
Right.
It's already been public. So now restricting it from these normal channels is really, I think, going to restrict it from defenders more so than bad actors. That's my take. So I don't think you're limiting harm in that case. That's my take on it. But so anyway, so this is the whole story. This is the big drama right now. Nightmare-eclipse releasing 6 0 days that I've seen so far. Their blog right now just has a very simple message that says 7. And so I don't know. Is there a 7th one? We don't know, because he's been banned from GitLab. So, we don't know what it is. But we'll find out. But so that's the ongoing drama. I just wanted to kind of try to wrap it up for people who aren't aware of it. I guess, what is your take on that, on full disclosure, responsible disclosure? What do you think about this stuff?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's layers to this. So I'll probably get lost somewhere along in my rant, but I think at an individual responsibility level, as a practitioner in the offensive security space, you want to, I think for the most part, most people want to do the right thing. They want to contribute to the security ecosystem positively. And I think the incentives to allow people to do that are not always there, or they're not always aligned with the best way to do that. And I think what you see in this case is an instance where that misalignment pushed an individual to believe that their only option was to go this full disclosure route. You and I may disagree, or somebody on Twitter may disagree, or whatever. But if you begin from that premise that this is a generally responsible individual who genuinely wants to contribute to the security space, then that's like the most credible narrative, right? And if you kind of for me, if I start thinking about that, if I was in that individual's shoes, I think, boy, it's difficult. I think they're doing their best in a sense to ensure that the research gets out so that people know about this. Obviously, there's reputational damage to Microsoft and MSRC specifically, which their blog did nothing to mitigate.
I was going to say, I honestly think their response did more damage than the whole saga. I really do. I think it did more damage than the release of the 0 days in terms of damage to their reputation. I just thought that was really, I was shocked, honestly. I was shocked that they made a statement, first of all, at all. And then when I read it, I was shocked at their stance and what they said. I just went like, oh no. Like I said, I worked on AWS bug bounty team. I launched their AI bug bounty program. And I mean, we talked about how we were responding to researchers, how we should think about it. But I mean, I can't imagine putting out that statement if I was leading that bug bounty. I just can't imagine, because how did you not know that was going to blow up in your face, MSRC? Like, you know, it just seemed like really poor judgment, and I just assumed that they were upset.
Yeah.
You know, at that point, I think they let emotion get into that response. I don't know. I'm sure it had to go by legal and everything. And I just wonder, I'm like, how did somebody not catch this and go, hey, this might be a bad idea, and we don't want to alienate or piss off our entire researcher community.
Yeah, and I think what you're seeing now on Twitter is exactly that. Is you're seeing a lot of individual researchers, some of whom have previously shared their stories and they're now resharing them, and some new stories are coming out about different instances and negative interactions with MSRC. And I'm sure on average MSRC interactions go fine. They're probably handling.
Yeah, I'm sure the majority are good, right? But you know,
but you get into these situations where an individual feels entrapped into doing these actions, and then the issue kind of gets exasperated, right? You ban them from GitHub, you ban them from GitLab.
Heavy-handed response. Yeah.
I don't think those responses are going to mitigate the next steps for this individual, right? That situation has not been resolved, if that's what the intent of those bans was. And I think one of the consequences will be, I think you saw the blog post is at 7. I think we'll probably likely see more. And like you also said, the manner in which those are released is going to continue to be into these darker forums where defense researchers don't necessarily know to look, but threat actors do. And so the asymmetry now is actually just gotten significantly worse. And I'll tie this into the LLM piece, which is like you mentioned, like the POCs themselves are exactly that. They're proof of concepts.
Right.
But getting those to some operationally ready state now with LLMs is, I want to say, like near trivial. Not to like minimize any work you did, but it's significantly.
But it is, right? I mean, once you put all your effort into the harness, in my opinion,
right?
And once you have that harness, it like I said, it is pretty trivial. It took me a couple of hours because I got hung up on a few things, but I mean, realistically, I want to get to a place where I can just point my harness and my model of choice at stuff like that, tell it to do it, walk away, one-shot it, right? And I don't think that's unreasonable at this point. And so, yeah, it's becoming more and more trivial to weaponize proof of concept code.
Yeah. And so So then now you have this compounded challenge, right? You have not only, as in years past, you have these 0 days that are getting released in these less public forums that are still accessible to threat actors, but the weaponization of those proof of concepts now is so much faster that I think the consequences are compounded in that way. I don't know like what a good answer is. Like, I would like to believe that we would have this big kumbaya moment where we would all realize that we would all be better off if we just talked a little bit more. But I don't think that's going to happen. And so we'll have to wait and see. I am curious. I think the previous blog post from that individual talked about July 14th as being some new date. So
yeah, I think and I think, let me see, I already have this on. Let me see if I can just pull this up real quick. So this is the blog for this person that we're talking about, right? And this is the post that you mentioned that talks about July 14th, right? And something to note in here is they said that they wouldn't release anything this June. This is before. This was
their bans.
GitHub had been banned, I believe. Yeah, it says right here. But their stuff was still on GitLab, and this hadn't blown up into this dramatic story on Twitter yet. And I bet that changes, right? Mm-hmm. I would be surprised if we didn't see anything until July 14th at this point. I think that this will, and maybe this is already hinting at that, right? 7, because when I saw this, I immediately thought, well, they had 6 0 days that I counted out before this, right? Is this number 7? And where is it? Because now I don't even know where to look, right? So I think this whole thing, in terms of MSRC's response, the banning of their GitHub and GitLab accounts, and kind of what I see as like a pressure campaign on an individual who's already very upset. And you can go read their posts here and see what I mean. They're very upset. I think that just is going to further motivate this person to keep going, right? That's what I think. I think so. When you do this, I think you're just encouraging more of the behavior that you say you want to stop, and that's why I thought it was a series of poor decisions in response, because I think it's just like fanning the flames of this situation. The author of the blog actually says something about that they are escalating this conflict. Right. And I think that that's a fair point to some extent. I don't see deconfliction taking place from either side, right? Neither side wants to deconflict at this point. And so, yeah, I don't see it stopping. There's no resolution here, as you said, right?
Yeah. Whenever you get into these sorts of situations, I think one of the things that I think about, and I'm going to steal this from a post I saw on Twitter. I can't remember who said it, so I can't give the attribution. But when any sort of researcher submits a bug or some sort of vulnerability to some service, the corporation, the entity that owns that, really has all the leverage on the researcher. So you immediately begin this relationship with this power disparity. And when that power disparity actually manifests into these consequences, I think the consequences are likely to continue to magnify themselves. And I think that's what we're seeing now. Like you said, I agree. I think this is going to continue to get worse. I don't know what the ultimate solution is. I think as the situation is now, the people most likely to suffer are the small businesses that don't have any sort of SOC, that don't have any sort of EDR, that are always at risk of getting popped. I think that has always existed. It exists now, and the threat vectors that affect them have only increased in this situation. despite whatever the Microsoft's blog post tried to claim contrary to that. And I would like to see some sort of resolution. I think in my mind that resolution is probably going to have to come from Microsoft in some way, some sort of retraction or some sort of change in that relationship. But I don't know. It's interesting because you're right. That individual does seem very hurt.
They do seem hurt. That's a great way to put it. I kept saying upset, pissed off, but I think it's important what you said, hurt. Because when you read the blog posts, even just some of the readmes, but mostly the blog posts, that does come through. This is somebody who has been hurt, feels they have been hurt, feels they have been wronged in some way, and just life experience. I don't think you resolve that through escalation usually.
Right.
I think that you have to have a discussion and you have to reach out to that person and try to understand, even if you think it's bullshit, I think you have to try to understand their perspective and try to understand why they feel slighted, why they feel hurt, and address that. I don't think you solve it through just pure force and heavy-handed measures. And that's also kind of sad if this person is struggling or feels hurt or harmed in some way, and you continue to escalate and use force against them. I think it's just going to drive them deeper into whatever's troubling them in the first place and sort of causing this situation. So, yeah, I think you're right. I don't know. We'll see how it resolves. I think it's going to take some time, and people will move on from this in terms of focus, but it's going to continue to pop up until there is some better resolution.
This gets into what I think is the human dimension of security on like the offensive side and the defensive side as well. Obviously, we see it here manifested like as a researcher, but insider threat has always been a thing. It'll always continue to be a thing, and that human dimension, I think we sometimes try to downplay. I think in the corporate landscape, you try to wish it away with like corporate training, like here's your cybersecurity training. Yeah. And in cases like this, I'm reminded that like people really are what is the security landscape, right? You might be like tricked into believing that the security landscape is a bunch of computers talking to each other, or like the EDR or whatever, but it's really people that make up the systems. And I think for me, this really shows that, and how when something spins out of control, like the entire ecosystem suffers. Sure, like it seems like a bunch of tweets where a bunch of researchers are just complaining, but like these are serious contributors to the conversation around what it means to what is a bug, how do we fix it, how do we address it, how do we remediate, and if they're losing faith or they have lost faith, what does that mean for the security community?
Yeah, I think it's terrible. That's one of the things I wouldn't have wished to happen in this scenario. I'll be honest. I was like, this has been like fun for me to watch because I'm sorry, it has been, but because I just, I got into hacking very early and it was very different. And in, the 90s, a lot of the hacker community, at least what I was exposed to, I think most of it, maybe all of it, was like hated Microsoft and treated them as the ultimate target because they hated them. They don't like them for a variety of reasons, right? Whatever. But then over time, that changed. And a lot of people worked with MSRC. A lot of people were proud of getting on the leaderboard and saying, hey, I reported this through MSRC. They patched it. This is great, all this stuff. And there was this relationship between the offensive security community, hackers, researchers, and Microsoft that previously had been really bad. And they had somehow, got it to this place where it was in a pretty good state, I think. And now yeah, I'm seeing researchers who are fantastic, who have great reputations in the community. We all know who they are. There's a bunch of them, right, that I think we all know, and they are now saying, I had bad experiences with MSRC2, and I don't want to deal with them in the future. And that's not good. Like objectively, if you care about if you really, like you talked about earlier, if the end goal is to improve security and to help the ecosystem do so, that's not going to help. You have researchers who are great at finding 0 days in Microsoft products and Azure and stuff like this, who have contributed in this way through the approved channels and gotten things fixed and patched, that are now saying, I'm not going to put up with it. I'm not going to participate in these programs. I'm either going to hold my stuff until I burn it, or I'm going to sell it, or whatever. And that's, I think, objectively not going to be good for that end goal of improving the security for everybody. I think that's an unfortunate side effect.
I almost feel like the magnitude of it in this case, or at least like the volume that has come out, it almost signals like a generational impact, right? So you have these people, these individuals who are great contributors to the security conversation and the security community. And there's obviously like a new generation of people who look up to them.
Yes.
And what they're seeing is that for the person that I look up to, for the person that I want to emulate and someday maybe even grow to become, that this system doesn't work for them. And so you're breaking this trust for not only the researchers you have today, but the researchers you're going to have tomorrow.
That's a great point.
And I don't know what that looks like, right? I think the demand for security with all the LLM stuff, like we talked about earlier, is only going to increase. The weaponization is getting faster. And what you need in this situation is more synergy between offense and defense. And this doesn't help in that case. And I don't know what that looks like for the security researchers today. And I really hope that there's some resolution quickly, because I think the longer this extends, the more damage and the more permanent the damage becomes.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I don't know what the resolution looks like. I mean, and I don't know what's best either. Some people might disagree with what I said about how positive the program had been and they might favor full disclosure. And there's an argument to be made for full disclosure. But I think regardless, whether Microsoft can mend those relationships with the community and earn back trust, which they're going to have a tough time doing now, and it's going to take time. But if they even choose to do so, that's one route. Maybe I don't know. Can you heal that, fix that? How long does it take? I don't know, but that seems to be an option still, I think. And then the other option is like adjusting for full disclosure becoming more normalized, I guess. And maybe we're headed in that direction. I'm not sure. But yeah, there's going to be pain along the way for sure. I totally agree. The longer that this sort of synergy is broken, this relationship, this trust is damaged, I think there's going to be consequences that are going to be painful. So yeah, I would like to see it resolved in some way as well quickly, but I have my doubts that it's going to be resolved quickly. I think there's going to be lingering effects to this for a long time to come. So yeah, and your point about affecting the younger researchers, I hadn't even really thought about that as much. I was just thinking about all these, legendary researchers I know who are now saying they don't want to deal with this. But you're absolutely right. The people who are coming up in the game and in their careers and look up to those people are going to get the message that this system doesn't work, and they're not going to want to participate in it, and they're going to look for other ways to participate. So that is unfortunate. I don't know what I would do if I was like in MSRC right now and I'm like scrambling to figure out my next action.
I'm glad I'm not, to be honest.
I'm glad I'm not, because that's really tough at this point. I don't know. I don't really know what you do. My reaction, I think I'd want to like somehow walk it back and like recover ground immediately, and not and say, hey, we don't want to ostracize everybody. And as I said, maybe there's something there where they feel like they did the right thing, kicking this person out of their program, and they can't talk to us about that for maybe legal reasons. Sure. And so I understand that, but at the same time, the statement that they did put out, the things they did say were not good. And so I understand if there's things you can't say and that you had to omit, and we don't have the full picture and all that, but you have to be even more careful with what you do say in that case. And I think they fumbled on that, and hopefully they put out a better statement. I don't know what that looks like, but anyway, that's a whole can of worms. I'm glad that I don't have to solve. And yeah, it's been interesting to watch for me because, like I said, I've seen kind of the different approaches to disclosure over time, and the different attitudes towards Microsoft, and it's been fun to watch the drama, but now it's like, okay, now there's consequences to this, right? And what are we going to do about that? So yeah, it'll be interesting to see where this goes. I wonder how long it's going to stay, how long it's going to maintain focus in the InfoSec community. I know we're quick to move on a lot of times, but I'm already surprised at how long this focus and this anger has been maintained. So something that I want to ask you about as well is with, we're talking about a researcher who probably spends a lot of time on this stuff. And I know that when I'm doing research like this, it's not something I like work up and I work on and walk away from. A lot of times I get like locked in, and I don't want to walk away. I need to stay here until I reach the solution or a milestone or whatever. And it's easy for me to get like super locked in on this stuff. So I wanted to ask you about your habits around this sort of research. And like, do you find yourself staying up late, working on a problem? Do you find yourself neglecting other things in work, in your life? I know staying up late by itself can, affect your day, your other parts of your life. So what are kind of some of the pitfalls, consequences of diving into some of this uncharted territory when you're trying to come up with a new thing, you're trying to do something new, and you're deep into this research, like I'm sure this researcher is. I'm sure they've spent long nights awake on these problems, and this is something that I've experienced and have difficulty sometimes managing. Kind of, does this happen to you? Do you have these issues around it, or have you figured out? Do you have a system to kind of keep minimize the consequences of working on this type of research?
Yeah, I think for me, it's an ongoing growth area. I think I'm still in that like obsessed state of mind. There's been several times where I get like a really interesting task at work, or I'm given a little bit of leeway to like investigate something. And then I bring it to the team on Monday, like I get it on Thursday. Like on Monday, I'm back with like, here's a proof of concept for like the thing we can do. I do have a lot of that obsession still. I think it's not quite as bad now. I think I've grown a little bit more to accept my accomplishments in a way and be comfortable in that. I think the worst of it was definitely when I was first trying to get my foothold in the community, when a like in
Yeah.
my last year in the Marine Corps, I was still publishing blogs like once a week. I think I started Patreon. I was doing my master's, and I was a captain in the United States Marine Corps. So like those
Wow.
things, those
Oh my
things are
gosh.
not a single one of those things is easy by itself. And I was like trying to do all of them at the same time. And
Yeah.
so my relationship with my wife suffered, and it's something I had to rebalance. And I think I'm still working on that. I'm still going to school, so I still have that. But I stopped doing Patreon. I blog like a couple times a year now, to try to rebalance these things, because it's important, I think, for like my personal longevity, but also just because like having balance as a human being is important. And I think I didn't recognize that for a long time. The Marine Corps doesn't help you in that way, right? It's just like win, 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 which is the mindset. And I still carry a lot of that with me. But now I can, like, if it's like the middle of the day and I need to take like an extra long lunch to go do something, or just like I need a breather, like I'm more comfortable doing that, where I wasn't always. I think for me personally, I consider myself like a recreational lifter, if that means anything. So
Yeah.
I regularly go to the gym. I go to the gym most mornings. I do like the big lifts, so squat, bench, deadlift, overhead press. I still do like pull-ups. The Marine Corps kind of like mindset doesn't go away there either. And those things kind of help keep me balanced. I definitely notice like if I miss a lift, I'm just like I'm like on edge all day, and nobody wants that. So I do my best to be consistent about it, and I try to also like engage with people in real life. I think if you know Oktoberfest, like I met him. We had lunch a couple weeks ago. I met a couple
Oh
other
yeah.
people in
Cool.
DC, because I think like having that sort of like human on human connection is really important. Like what we're doing now is like 1 degree of separation, right? We're face to face, we're on a screen. Having like real physical face to face communication is very important, especially like when I do a lot of my work remote, and so that helps me as well. And then just I do my best to be honest with myself. I think for a long time I struggled with that. Again, like maybe it's like a consequence of being a Marine. It's like, no, I can't suck at anything. Like I'm definitely the best. But like over time, I've grown to understand that you can really only improve if you're like actually honest with who you are. And like you have to start with like, yeah, I suck. Like I'm getting like 3 hours of sleep a night, and then I'm working like 21 hours a day. Like this is not sustainable. Like you cannot do this. And I think hopefully my aspiration is that over time I'll continue to improve, and someday like I'll be perfectly balanced, whatever that means.
Right.
But yeah, I think I'm in an okay place right now. I want to be better, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and I talk to people about this. I've struggled with it. You know, and I remember there's somebody really great who used to work with me at SecureWorks Adversary Group. They're at CrowdStrike now. And I used to like beg him to go sleep. Like on you know, chat, I would talk to him and we'd be working on a test, or I'd be asking about something, and I would be like, dude, did you go to sleep last night? You know, he's like showing me something he was working on last night when I left, and he's showing it to me, and I'm like, dude, you did not go to sleep last night. And he's like, yeah, I'm like, go to sleep right now, man. I got this. Go take a nap. Like, you're killing yourself, you know? But then I was guilty of it at times too. I think later I was more guilty of it maybe. And that it's still a struggle to some extent, because I don't know. I still wonder, like, do you have to be obsessed to accomplish at a certain level, you know? And that's difficult, because you look at people who achieve a certain level of greatness, whether it's an athlete or a hacker, or, you know, somebody in business who, you know, climbs that world. It's like they're obsessed, and you know that they've neglected other parts of their life. There's probably consequences and problems as a result of their obsession with this thing and the extent they've taken it to. But then you go like, but would he be a champion otherwise? Like, I still struggle with that question. I'm like, so I'm trying to find that balance too. And I want to have more balance. I have to, because I'm a human being. I'm not a machine. And so I have family and I have all these other responsibilities besides that. Right. And so I have to find more balance. But at the same time, I struggle with these ideas around, what is enough balance? When have I like feel like I don't want to lose the obsession completely.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want that in there. And I want to be able to turn it on and turn it off, but you can't, it's hard to do that. Right.
Yeah.
And it's hard to, at times I feel like it's difficult to achieve what I want to, unless I stay embedded in the community, in my research. It's almost like FOMO. It's like fear of missing out. It's like, if I'm not embedded, what am I missing? So it's something I struggle with. I ask people like yourself about it when I get the opportunity, because I'm looking for tips. I'm looking for how they think about it, as well as for people who listen and check out the show. I think it's really good information, because it's, especially like you said, it's early on when you're trying to learn and achieve, but also prove yourself. It's like you want to prove yourself to the community. You want to prove yourself so you can get this job you want or whatever. And it's very easy to just pour everything into that, thinking like, I can rest later. Like once I get the thing, then I won't do this. Then
there's always the next thing,
exactly.
That's the trap.
Exactly. It is. Exactly. That is the trap. And I realized at one point, I was like, wait a minute. I've been telling myself this for like years now. Mm-hmm. Like I've been telling myself, once I achieve this thing, then I can chill. And that day never came, because once I achieved that, I was like, I didn't even care about that anymore. I'm on to this other thing. That actually, this is what I always needed to achieve. And I just thought that was what I needed, but this is what I need. And it just never ends. And I realized at some point, like, oh, this never ends. Yeah. And if I don't pay attention to this, years will go by, damage will be done, and I'm still just grinding like it's my first year trying to break into the business or trying to get the job I want or whatever. And this doesn't stop. Right. And so, I think it's super important to recognize that and find a way to live while still, remaining obsessed enough, I guess, to do what you want to do. Right.
Yeah. There was a really powerful insight. So I'm working on my MBA now. And one of the first classes I took as part of my curriculum was a leadership class. And I'd taken leadership classes before. You're an officer, you take leadership classes full time. The Naval Academy, you take one every semester. But those are generally like military oriented leadership, commandership, if that helps you think about it a little bit more. But there was a really important lecture where the professor talked about one way to ground yourself is that you can imagine this context where it's not you doing these things. It's someone you care about a lot, your child or your wife or your brother or something, and you're seeing them work 23 hours in a day, or you're seeing them not sleep for weeks at a time, or you're seeing them obsessed. And would you want that for them? Right? The answer is typically no. Like you don't want somebody you care about in those situations, putting themselves through that. You want to help them find balance. And so then the obvious question then is, why do you do that to yourself? Why do you submit yourself to that? And so that was just one of those moments. Like it's just an absolute epiphany. Like I don't know if before that had happened, I don't know if I really believed in epiphanies, but that moment for sure, I think for me was really enlightening. In that like I talked about, like historically I have been very guilty of that, and so I've used that perspective, or I've tried to use that perspective to shape my behavior and be a little bit better. But it's a struggle. I think like innately, like a little part of me wants to be like, no, like if you want to win, this is what you have to do, and that's just how it is. But I still working on that balance. So.
Yeah, that is a great point. I mean, I even said when my friend was doing it and he was doing C2 development, exploit development, doing all these things, and he wasn't sleeping, and I knew it, and I'm like, dude, go to bed.
Yeah.
You're hurting yourself. Like, but then later, I did the same exact thing to myself, and I had no problem with that.
Yeah.
Because I don't mind me suffering,
right,
as much as people I care about. Why is that? I don't know. That's probably a whole psychological element to that. But especially people who have been in the military, this is, there's this mentality too about suffering in silence and just doing whatever it takes. And who cares if it hurts? This is what has to happen to, like you said, to win. And so it like somehow it's okay in my mind to do things that harm myself, make myself suffer to achieve, when you're absolutely right. If I was watching somebody I really care about do that same thing, I would not want them to do that. So that's a great way to think about it. I think that's really awesome anecdote about it, and should be super helpful for people to avoid that pitfall. I think that's awesome. Awesome way to think about it. I never thought about it like that. But it's definitely true. And I've tried to intervene with my friends many times.
Me too.
But it was much harder to intervene for myself.
It's harder to even recognize it, I feel like, right? When you're in the moment, right? I love the term locked in. I think it's a relatively new term, right? Thank you, Gen Z. But it like actually is very precise in what happens, I think, mentally. You absolutely are locked into whatever it is you're doing.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to come out of that, to even recognize that you yourself are in that situation. Because the only thing you can see, or for myself, like the only thing I can see is like this isn't compiling, or it's compiling and it's crashing, or like, I'm in the debugger, like
oh, I can't see anything at that point, man. Like, I am blinders on, tunnel vision.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So.
Yeah, that's really hard to walk away from. And my wife knows all about that, because how many times it's like, hey, dinner's ready. Hey, are you coming to bed? And I'm like this.
Yeah.
I'm like, I just got to finish this.
Yeah,
and she knows better. She knows better. She knows, okay, I'll see him in like 4 hours. He'll come to bed in like 4 hours. But in my mind, I'm 5 minutes away.
Yeah,
I just one more thing. I'm almost there.
One more change, and it's good.
Yeah, that's it. I just changed this one thing, and then 5 hours has gone by, and I'm like totally wrecked. So yeah, it's really difficult to get out of that in the moment tunnel vision, much less just recognize the pattern of behavior that's been taking place over time. Really difficult. So yeah, I love talking about it, and I hope people who listen can learn a little bit from what we've been through in that, because you could spiral a bit when you get into that. So definitely something to watch out for. But you've had amazing insights for people in the industry, people in the space, especially coming up. I guess just last thing I really want to ask you about is like, there's people out there. You've attained this thing, right? Like I said, you do development on Cobalt Strike. I think the most successful commercial C2 product in history. One of the most important in the space, period. Just this incredible thing. People are going to look at that and think, I want to do that. How do I get to that place? And I know you said, oh, I kind of, didn't mean to do this, and this, I just kind of got on this path and everything. But even so, for those people who may, look at this and say, boy, that's what I'm trying to do. I want to get to that place. Is there anything, any advice, any just recommendations you could share with people who are looking at it that way, who, whether it's they're in malware development or they just want to get to a certain place in their career like yours, what could you tell them?
Yeah, I think I'll do this in two pieces. On the technical side, I think the differentiator between individuals that are okay and then individuals that are really good is usually just in the Marine Corps would call it like brilliance in the basics, right? So that means like being able to, like, now I guess 2026, like manually writing code, being able to manually debug things, being able to understand the concepts behind why something is working and how it's working. There's no secret, right? I think a lot of times, influencers on social media or whatever will talk about like my 3 easy ways to get hired at Netflix or whatever. In my perspective is not that. My perspective is if you get really good at the fundamentals, everything else kind of falls into place for you. It becomes intuitive to build into these advanced concepts. You'll stop really thinking about them as advanced concepts. It's just like the way things work. So that's like the technical side. On the person side, the human side, I think just don't get caught up in the ego. I think there's a tendency to do that, I think, in the space. Whereas like you get better for some reason, you feel the need to put other people down, or maybe that's just like the circle of people you're in. I've done my best, and I haven't been perfect by any means, but I've done my best to try to be like a good dude, for lack of a better word. And I try to encourage other people to take that perspective as well. I think especially right now with the job market the way it is, like referrals are your best friend. Knowing people, and like it's not. I went to MBA seminar, and one of the insights, one of the most useful insights that came out of that in my in-person seminar in March was it's not about like who knows or like who you know. I think sometimes there's that saying, right? That's like it's not what you know, it's who you know, but it's not really about that either. It's about who knows you, like who's willing to speak to who you are as a human being, the caliber of person that you are, both on the technical side and on the human side, because ultimately they have to be willing to stand by you as a person, right? And so I think that piece is equally important. It's more important right now, just because of the way the job market is, but that's just something to strive for. And so if I had advice to give, like that would be my advice.
Yeah, I completely agree. And yeah, I would remind people that it is a tight community. And so people will get an idea of who you are, and I think it's important to maintain your reputation in such a tight community as offensive security, especially, but even broader cybersecurity, InfoSec. A lot of us know each other, and you'll run into people at jobs, and it's a pretty tight community. And if you damage your reputation, it's going to be more difficult for you. And I can get pretty spicy on Twitter sometimes. I'm not perfect.
The good old OST debates.
I can, and I'm not. Sometimes I'll even say something, and I'm like, why did I? That's not nice. Why did I do that?
Right.
I'm not, because I don't like, I guess, that side of me or side of people where you feel the need to like lash out at somebody or be kind of nasty to somebody. And I try not to. I try not to, but sometimes I slip. And I do apologize to people if I've like shit on you on Twitter before. It sucks. I'm sorry. I try to do my best, but sometimes it gets a little spicy. But I totally agree. I think that if it's better for you yourself if you can maintain being positive and not shitting on people, even if they seemingly deserve it at the time. I think it's generally best to be the bigger person and all that, and to just be positive, try not to be negative. And, I think, again, it's a tight community, and I think it'll serve you well if people see you that way. And I certainly have seen you that way. That's something I noticed about you on on social media is I'm like, man, he's really cool. He's like chill. He's not
Thank you.
not an asshole. Because there are people out there that I think they're amazing at their technical skill and the things they produce, but then I'm like, man, he's kind of mean. Like he's kind of not cool, and that's unfortunate. Or not approachable, or will call you stupid or something, right? And that sucks. And so, but I've never thought that about you. I thought that you were approachable. It's one of the reasons I felt okay reaching out to ask you to do this, actually. If I saw you as somebody who is like ready to call people stupid and yell at them, I wouldn't have seen you as approachable maybe to do this, right? So, it made it easier to approach you for this, and it's been awesome. I got to say, this has been one of my favorite interviews. This has been awesome. You've been outstanding. I really, really appreciate you coming and doing this. I think it's been really great. And I think it'll help people a lot.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again for having me. It's been an absolute blast. I think we kind of hit relevant issues and past issues and kind of everything. So it's been awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And again, I it's my honor, and your work has been awesome. So definitely appreciate your contribution in the space, everything you do. So thanks again, Steve.
Thank you.
To an end, to an end, to an end.